On July 3rd, Congress passed the One Big Beautiful Bill on a razor-thin vote count. The bill has captured headlines for months, primarily due to massive tax breaks and more than $1 trillion in combined cuts from Medicaid, SNAP, and other programs. First, what is the bill? The One Big Beautiful Bill passed through a complicated and often politicized process called reconciliation. These types of bills, which can only happen once a year, deal with spending, revenue, and the federal debt limit. So what is in this huge 900-page bill, and what does it mean for Kansas in the coming years? First, let's start with the tax implications before other KAC experts describe impacts to Medicaid, SNAP, immigration, and education. Essentially, this reconciliation bill is a tax bill. The program cuts to health care and food assistance were made to pay for tax cuts, and most of the tax cuts for regular people like you and me are only temporary, but the tax cuts for wealthy Americans were made permanent. Let's dig into the temporary provisions first. Instead of eliminating taxes on tips, Social Security, or overtime, the bill makes these savings more complicated through a deduction for certain workers and senior citizens. You'll still see the same taxes taken out of your paycheck if you work overtime. Instead, you'll have to wait until tax season to see any kind of savings from this provision, which will likely be smaller than you think. And there's a catch to the tax cuts for working class Americans. They expire after 2028. One good thing to come out of this bill is the Baby Bonds pilot program, also called Trump accounts, which will provide a $1,000 deposit for children born during the Trump administration. Parents will be able to contribute to the account over their baby's childhood. And while we won't know the impact of this program until the mid-2040s, baby bonds are generally expected to reduce wealth inequality. But how aware parents will be in the next 4 years and what happens to this program in the future is highly uncertain. If you itemize your taxes, there is a temporary increase in the deduction limit for state and local taxes. Prior to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017, there was no cap, but that bill capped it at $10,000. Now that $10,000 will increase to a $40,000 cap through 2029. That means if you pay more than $10,000 in state and local taxes and you itemize, you'll be able to increase the amount you deduct. The core of this bill is the permanent extension of the 2017 tax cuts. As opposed to the temporary tax cuts for the working class, the cuts this bill makes permanent are heavily skewed toward the very wealthy. In Kansas, this means that the richest 5% will receive 40% of the tax cuts that flow to the state. Those are households making more than $305,000 a year. The estate tax exemption, for example, was raised by $1 million to $15 million. This change alone really shows who this bill is for and is expected to cost more than $200 billion over 10 years. The federal child tax credit was increased from $2,000 to $2,200, which would be great if not for the change in eligibility rules that will take this credit away from more than 2.6 million American children because their parents are immigrants. This includes nearly 25,000 U.S. citizen children in Kansas. The provision that will affect most people, though not by much, is a small increase in the standard deduction. About 90% of taxpayers take the standard deduction instead of listing every expense that reduces their taxes for that year. Finally, this bill significantly cuts tax credits for renewable energy products that were a part of the Inflation Reduction Act. This is by far the most expensive bill in U.S. history. Most of this cost is the extension of the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which is expected to cost more than $3.8 trillion over 10 years. But there is also more than $1 trillion in new spending and tax cuts. Even with nearly $1.5 trillion in cuts to food assistance, Medicaid, and renewable energy tax credits, this bill still adds more than $4 trillion to the U.S. debt when you include the interest cost. And that is assuming the tax cuts expire on time. This bill will significantly raise the U.S. debt as a percent of national income, which puts our financial stability at greater risk. And the impact on Kansans' wallets from this bill is going to be huge. Because of the change in eligibility rules for the federal child tax credit, about 25,000 children are expected to lose the credit altogether in Kansas. Demand for energy is expected to rise rapidly in the coming years, and failure to invest in critical energy technology will lead to higher electric bills for all of us. Estimates show that household spending on energy will increase by an average of $210 per year in 2030 and more than $670 in 2035. Interest rates are likely to stay high and could even increase because of their connection to the rising national debt. With the bill adding $4 trillion to the debt over the next decade, a financial crisis is more likely in the long term. And finally, the bottom 20% of earners in Kansas could even see a slight tax increase of $10 per year. And while that may seem small, to families and individuals making less than $20,000 per year, it can be the difference between having food for a day or not, especially when their food and health benefits are being put at risk by the bill. This is just another example that plainly shows who this bill is and isn't for.
Since the Affordable Care Act passed years ago, more people all over the country have been able to access and afford health insurance, especially the past few years. But with the passage of the big, beautiful reconciliation bill, millions of Americans will now struggle to find, afford, and keep their health insurance. The bill does this in 4 big ways. First, the bill cuts Medicaid funding by nearly $1 trillion, the largest cut in the program's 60-year history. Many of the bill's supporters say that these new changes and cuts simply eliminate fraud and waste. But that's not true. The $1 trillion in Medicaid cuts will be because people will no longer be able to see the doctor when they are sick or need treatment, all because of the complications that this law puts in place to keep their Medicaid. This is particularly true for states that have already expanded Medicaid, as people in the Medicaid expansion income category will now be required to jump through multiple layers of red tape and additional barriers to keep their health care while they work. This includes parents of kids older than 13. For instance, they'll be subjected to work reporting requirements, which are strict measures that an enrollee must follow to remain eligible for their Medicaid coverage. And they'll now also have to prove they are still eligible for Medicaid every 6 months instead of once a year. If they mess up even just a tad, or something on the state end goes sideways through no fault of their own, it likely means the end of their health coverage. They would no longer be able to access critical medications or treatments to manage their health, which so many need to continue working. As Kansas has yet to expand Medicaid, these expansion-related changes won't impact Kansans at this time. Second, as this law's other Medicaid changes are implemented over the next few years, we do expect more Kansas kids, pregnant women, and people living with disabilities to be impacted, both from coverage loss due to additional paperwork burdens and from potential services cut due to funding losses. Third, those Kansans who purchased their health insurance coverage through healthcare.gov, also called the federal marketplace, will be impacted by additional red tape and barriers. With the enhanced insurance premium tax credits now expiring at the end of 2025, insurance costs will skyrocket for Kansans who typically purchase coverage through healthcare.gov. These tax credits reduce the cost of marketplace health insurance premiums to be more affordable for low and moderate income families. However, recent analysis indicates that 2026 premiums will be increasing by an average of 75%. With the expiration of the enhanced tax credits and much higher premiums, it's likely many people will have no choice but to go uninsured if they can't pay for the higher premiums. Fourth, now only a small group of lawfully residing immigrants will be able to receive Medicaid coverage, compared to before, where other legal immigrants in crisis could receive health coverage. The bottom line, altogether, at least 10 million Americans will lose their health insurance coverage thanks to all of these changes. But we expect that number will likely be much higher. In Kansas, tens of thousands of people are expected to lose their health insurance coverage because they can't navigate additional and complex paperwork requirements or won't be able to afford increased marketplace premiums. The cost savings of this bill comes from the people losing their health insurance coverage, and those costs will be transferred to states and local communities and further burden fragile healthcare systems, particularly for our rural hospitals. Too many rural Kansas hospitals are already at risk of closure. And if these hospitals close, that impacts the healthcare access of everyone, regardless of insurance type, which means all Kansans would be forced to drive further distances for healthcare, even for delivering babies. If our state legislature has less funding available to pay for the Medicaid program, they may look at cutting optional services, such as those that keep people living with disabilities in their homes and communities. Congress should be doing much more to ensure people have access to the health insurance coverage they need, not cutting funding and additional barriers added that will make it harder for people to access Medicaid and healthcare.gov. The health legacy of this law will be the millions of uninsured Americans and the destroyed health of our communities.
For decades, Americans across the country have used food stamps, or what today is called SNAP, to help put food on the table during hard times. This reconciliation bill cuts SNAP by $178 billion over the next decade. For families that rely on a little bit of extra help to have enough to eat, millions are going to see their benefits reduced, even as the cost of groceries continues to go up. For Kansas, a recent analysis shows that 20,000 Kansas families are going to lose at least some of their food assistance. They calculate that each of those families will lose about $72 per month, which is quite a bit of food that families won't be able to buy. These massive cuts will affect families in a few different ways. The first one we're going to discuss is work reporting requirements, meaning recipients are required to report a certain number of hours worked over a certain time period. Now, several states have had these in place for a few populations, but this bill extends these work reporting requirements to a couple of new populations. First, it requires that people through the age of 64 work at least 80 hours per month. The previous maximum age was just 54. This means folks who are growing older, who are aging out of the workforce, who are developing various health conditions, folks who may have an increased need for food assistance will now lose those benefits if they don't maintain a relatively steady work schedule. This bill also extends work reporting requirements to adults with school-aged children for the first time in history, if those kids are age 14 or above. So if a high schooler gets sick, has to go to the hospital, gets a diagnosis of some sort, these things do happen, and a parent needs to stay home with them, there's a good chance they'll lose their food assistance at a time when they need it the most. Decades of research shows that work reporting requirements do not lead to increased employment or self-sufficiency. Instead, they just kick people off these much-needed programs. According to the research, the people who are going to lose their benefits are those who need the assistance the most, namely people struggling with disabilities and chronic illnesses, as well as the family members who need to stay home and take care of them. In fact, most people who are able to work are already working, but now they'll have to deal with a new layer of bureaucracy, log into a portal every month, upload documents to prove they're working, and just one small slip up could mean the difference between being able to buy groceries every month or going hungry. Next, I'm going to talk about the cost shift to the states. Throughout the history of SNAP, the program's benefits have been fully funded by the federal government. This makes sense because state budgets tend to be much more constrained than the federal government. But this bill defies that conventional wisdom and shifts some of the benefit costs to the states for the first time in history, beginning in fiscal year 2028. The formula they use to decide how much a state will need to pay is a little complicated, but it's likely Kansas will have to pick up 10 to 15% of the total cost of our food assistance program. This means the Kansas legislature will have to find somewhere around $40 million to $60 million, depending on how the numbers fall, to fund the program. That's a lot of money for our state's budget. And it's going to force lawmakers to decide if they want to defund other important state programs to pay for SNAP, or just let SNAP in completely. Because if the legislature is unable or unwilling to find the tens of millions of dollars in new funding, it means Kansas would be opting out of SNAP altogether, and all 187,000 Kansans will lose their food assistance. While this change won't come into effect for a while, we can't forget that we're now on this worrisome path, and there's still time for advocacy to our federal delegation to reverse this provision. The next area of SNAP cuts are from immigrants who are in the country legally. Under this bill, the only non-citizen immigrants who will remain eligible for SNAP benefits are green card holders, people granted Cuban or Haitian entrant status, and people residing under the Compact of Free Association, which includes just 3 small Pacific islands. All other legal immigrant statuses will be banned from SNAP. That's a significant change because SNAP has historically been available to the most vulnerable immigrants, such as refugees and asylum seekers, trafficking survivors, domestic violence survivors, people who are fleeing dangerous and traumatic situations, and who have legal status in the United States. This bill abandons those folks who have been eligible for SNAP up until now, but who will lose their food assistance now that this bill has passed. And a reminder that these are the same folks who will also lose access to Medicaid. Thinking about the SNAP cuts as a whole, the most concerning part is the possibility that states, including Kansas, will be able to opt out of the program altogether. If Kansas lawmakers cannot or will not pick up the cost, all 187,000 Kansans currently enrolled in SNAP will lose their food assistance. Those who lose SNAP will still need food, so food pantries and churches are likely to see an increase in folks coming in through their doors. However, federal cuts have also affected some of the programs that food pantries use to get some of their food. So it could be a struggle to meet the increased need, and the truth is, we're likely going to see more Kansas families struggling with hunger. Aside from the direct impact of taking food off Kansans' tables, we'll likely see some secondary impacts as well. Grocery stores, which tend to operate on a very small profit margin, rely in part on SNAP dollars to help keep their doors open. When millions of dollars of federal money stops flowing into our state, we're likely to see some of those smaller grocery stores close. In rural communities, this could be particularly devastating. If the only grocery store in town closes, it means community members are now having to drive dozens of miles to the closest big box store. So the cuts to SNAP end up affecting far more Kansans than just those who are losing their benefit. Next up, massive extra funding to scale up immigration enforcement. This bill includes $45 billion in funding for building new immigration detention centers, including family detention centers where children will be detained. The overwhelming majority of that budget is going to go to private companies like CoreCivic to build and run detention facilities. The bill includes $3.5 billion to help state and local law enforcement agencies scale up their immigration enforcement operations. This is a role that local law enforcement has traditionally left to federal agencies, so this represents a shift in practice. And the Kansas Bureau of Investigation has stated they are currently ramping up to help with immigration enforcement. This funding will allow them to more easily expand their immigration enforcement in addition to what ICE is already doing. There's another $30 billion for ICE that will be used mostly on hiring new agents and vastly expanding the size of their force, making it the largest police force in the country. The bill also allows Customs and Border Patrol to turn away unaccompanied children at the border and send them back to the country they fled from without any supervision. The bill also allows for indefinite detention of children. There's $46 billion for a border wall. There are new fees for things like asylum and temporary protected status that will create difficulties for people trying to seek refuge, as they won't be able to afford these fees. There's also a provision that allows government agents to examine the bodies of children for tattoos and other markings. This bill is loaded with funding and provisions that allow them to ramp up a detention and deportation regime with little to no oversight, leaving immigrant families living in constant fear of abduction.
While much of the reconciliation bill has received attention for its cuts to Medicaid and SNAP, as well as some of the high-profile tax changes, the bill also adjusts some child care-focused tax credits, which should help Kansas families see extra dollars back when they file their taxes next spring. First, the bill expands the Child and Dependent Care Tax Credit, which helps working parents with child care expenses. Parents use this tax credit to claim a portion of their child care expenses on their tax returns and reduce their total tax liability when they file. The credit works on a sliding scale, allowing parents in lower earning brackets to receive a higher percentage of their claimed amounts on their return, while higher earning bracket households will receive a smaller percentage. The maximum amount the parents can receive stays the same at up to $3,000 for one child and up to $6,000 for 2 or more children in care. Going forward, when families claim the Child Independent Care Tax Credit for their children's care, they will now receive up to 50% of the claimed expenses for 2 or more children. That means that now, families claiming 2 or more children's child care expenses could in fact see a potential $900 more than they saw last year. However, this credit is non-refundable, meaning that only those who have enough in tax liability can claim the credit, so many low-income families may not feel the full impact of this change. Also, when considering tax implications for parents, employees at businesses who provide dependent care assistance plans can now set aside more of their pre-tax earnings per year in their dependent care flexible spending accounts, or what most people know as an FSA. Increasing from $5,000, employees will now be able to set aside up to $7,500 in their dependent care FSA each year. Additionally, the bill earmarks federal dollars for the scholarship tax credit. Each state will have to opt in to this program, but starting January 1st, 2027, donors will receive a dollar-for-dollar tax credit for their donations to scholarship granting organizations, or SGOs, for up to $1,700 per taxpayer. Students receiving funds from SGOs can use those funds for expenses like private school tuition, books, and homeschooling costs. Public school students can also use these funds for private tutoring, and the scholarships will be available to families earning up to 300% of their region's median income, making this a nearly universal program. In Kansas, this is a household making up to $218,000 per year. The federal voucher-like system essentially shifts billions in tax dollars toward private education institutions, which are not required to accept all students or meet the same accountability measures as public schools. Finally, the reconciliation bill also makes significant changes to how people will pay for college. For instance, the bill enacts lifetime borrowing caps for graduate students and parents, and it creates the Repayment Assistance Plan, which is intended to replace the current student loan repayment plans. There are also changes to eligibility for Pell Grants and the creation of the Workforce Pell Grant for short-term job training programs. Many of the student loan changes become effective in July 2026, so this is likely to impact this year's incoming high school senior classes. As you can see, the One Big Beautiful Bill has made a lot of changes that will affect Americans immediately and for years to come. And we have only scratched the surface of what's in this 900-page bill. In fact, most lawmakers don't even know what all is in it. We have more updates about the bill on our website, which you can visit to find even more details. We will continue to share updates about the reconciliation bill and other federal funding and policy changes as more analysis and understanding become clear. Follow our work on our website, kac.org, or on Facebook and LinkedIn. You can also join our mailing list at kac.org/join to receive updates on issues like this in your inbox. Thanks for watching.